When people think of anatomy, often the first thing that comes to mind is musculature. This is partially right, as it does involve the study of the body through a separation of parts, but I think artistic anatomy can be better defined as how the body is structured, what its limitations are, which muscles and bones are visible from the surface, and why. First, let's focus on structure. Remember those boxes and cylinders from my video on form? Those can be thought of as the skeleton of the body with a thin layer of muscle placed over top. 3D form is still the most important part, whereas muscles are the icing on the cake, if you will. Musculature can make living things look more convincing, but without structure, you'll end up with a gelatinous mess, like a body without a skeleton. Focusing too much on anatomy without a knowledge of basic forms will also make figures extremely difficult to rotate in 3D space. At the same time, however, building your figures solely out of blocks will make them look stiff and robotic. Being able to translate those blocks into something more natural looking is a skill that will take time to develop, but is well worth the effort. Moving along in our definition, limitations. Try extending your arm out behind you. Unless you have a dislocated shoulder, you won't be able to reach very far. Now move your arm out in front of you. You should now be able to reach straight up at a 90-degree angle. The legs follow a similar pattern. Limited motion from behind and increased motion from the side and front. Though the legs still aren't quite as flexible as the arms. Which makes sense, since the legs are really only designed for walking, crouching, and jumping, whereas we depend on our arms and hands for a much wider variety of tasks. This can be summed up as range of motion. Your joints all have limits as to how far they can stretch without causing damage. Anything that moves outside this range will look, at best, unnatural, and at worst, terrifying. Which is why it's important to keep in mind when drawing characters in a variety of poses. Lastly, I've emphasized visible because beginners often assume you need to spend countless hours studying every little bone and muscle that makes up the human body, which can make anatomy seem a lot more intimidating than it needs to be. This may be relevant if you intend on doing anatomically accurate medical illustrations, but that's the only exception that I can think of. Should you know what the deltoid is? Yes, because it's a large muscle group that's visible even on thin figures. Do you need to know every tendon in the wrist, every metatarsal in the foot, or whatever the lesser supraclavicular fossa is? Not really, unless you enjoy punishing yourself. You should have enough anatomical knowledge under your belt to convincingly draw whatever it is you want to draw, but there's no need to go overboard. A common misconception when it comes to drawing anatomy is that more detail is better. Getting detailed with your figures may show off your anatomical knowledge, but will likely make them look cluttered and difficult to read. Thankfully, we have a layer of skin which hides the majority of these muscles, leading to a much simpler and more appealing drawing. The key word here is subtlety. You should have an understanding of which muscles go where and how they connect together, but you'll only need a minimal amount of lines to communicate where they are on the figure. I should also note that any human anatomical knowledge you learn is transferable. Most animals in general will have a skull, ribcage, and pelvis. Mammals in particular all share a similar skeletal structure. A human on all fours closely resembles a dog, and the same can be said about a dog standing on its hind legs. We even have a tailbone, though ours don't extend outside of our bodies. I won't be going over the muscles of the human body here, as that would make this video extremely long, and because this is simply meant as an introduction to the concept of anatomy. There's also no specific exercises for this video either, but two books I recommend having on hand while learning human anatomy are Figure Drawing, Design and Invention by Michael Hampton, and Classic Human Anatomy by Valerie L. Winslow. And if you happen to be the type who thinks books are lame and for nerds, don't fret, as I plan on making a separate video series covering the whole human figure, which I'd say is a pretty good reason to click on that fancy subscribe button. Happy drawing, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!